It was a cold February evening when Jean Morris looked at my phone and stopped breathing for a moment. I was standing in her kitchen, close enough to the radiator to feel the heat against my coat. But my hands were still cold. One of them was wrapped around my mobile so tightly that my fingers had begun to ache. Jean had only asked why I looked distracted. I should have made an excuse and gone home. Instead, I showed her the photograph. The woman on the screen had silver hair, kind eyes, and a warm smile. She was wearing a dark wool coat with a small silver brooch pinned near the collar. Jean leaned closer. "Where did you get this?" I tried to smile. "That's Sarah." "Sarah who?" "Sarah Bennett." Jean said nothing. The kitchen clock ticked behind us. A pan simmered quietly on the cooker, filling the room with the smell of vegetable soup. I gave a small laugh. "You're looking at her as though she's wanted by the police." Jean didn't laugh. "How long have you known her?" "Nearly 4 months." "And you've met her?" "Not yet. She's in Cyprus." Jean looked up at me. "Peter, we speak every day," I said quickly. "Morning and evening. Sometimes for hours." She took the phone carefully from my hand and enlarged the photograph. Then she pointed to the brooch. "That isn't Sarah Bennett." I felt irritation rise in me before fear had a chance. "You've confused her with someone else." "No. People resemble one another. I know where I've seen this exact photograph." Her certainty unsettled me. "Where?" Jean placed the phone on the kitchen table and opened one of the drawers beside the sink. She searched beneath takeaway menus, church newsletters, and old birthday cards. "I helped with a hospice fundraiser last autumn," she said. "Our church handed out leaflets." I watched her pull out a folded piece of paper. There was a woman featured in the campaign. Her husband had received end-of-life care there. She unfolded the leaflet and placed it beneath the light. The room seemed to narrow around me. There she was. The same silver hair, the same dark coat, the same brooch, the same gentle smile I had looked at every morning for nearly 4 months. But underneath the photograph was a different name. Dr. Eleanor Price. Retired consultant. North Yorkshire. I stared at it until the words blurred. "No," I said. Jean touched my arm. "Peter." "No. Sarah told me she was originally from Harrogate. Perhaps they know each other. Perhaps the photograph was used with permission." Even as I spoke, the explanation sounded weak. Jean didn't argue. She simply asked, "Has she asked you for money?" My stomach tightened. 2 hours earlier, Sarah had sent me a message saying the Cypriot probate office required one final payment before releasing her inheritance. £18,000. She had promised she would fly home within 48 hours. I had already completed the transfer form. All I had left to do was confirm it on my phone. Jean's voice softened. "How much have you sent already?" I looked away. Outside her window, rain slid down the glass. Through it, I could see the side of my own house, dark and empty next door. "Peter." I couldn't answer. My phone vibrated on the table. A new message appeared beneath Sarah's photograph. "Once this is settled, darling, I can finally come home to you." For months, I had believed every loving word. I had told her things I had never told my daughter, things I had barely admitted to myself. And now, standing in Jean's kitchen with another woman's name printed beneath the face I thought I loved, one question filled the room. If the woman in the photograph was not Sarah Bennett, who had I been telling my deepest secrets to every night 4 months earlier? My life had been ordinary in the way lonely lives often are. Nothing was visibly wrong. That was the trouble. I woke before 7 every morning, even though retirement had removed any reason to. 40 years working around railway timetables had trained my body too well. By 7:10, the kettle would be boiling and BBC Radio York would be talking quietly from the windowsill. I always used the same mug, blue, with a faded picture of Whitby Abbey on the side. Margaret had bought it for me during one of our last holidays before she became ill. "Don't put that in the dishwasher," she used to say. "You'll ruin it." 4 years after her death, I still washed it carefully by hand. I ate toast at the kitchen table and looked out at the garden. The lawn needed attention. The fence leaned slightly near Jean's side. Margaret would have noticed both immediately. I noticed them too. I simply lacked the reason to do anything about them. Most days were built from small tasks. I walked to the local shop for a newspaper I rarely finished. I checked the boiler pressure. Even when it was fine, I polished tools in the shed that I no longer used. Once a month, I attended lunch with a few retired railway men at a pub near the station. We complained about modern trains, laughed about old supervisors, and avoided mentioning illness unless someone had already died. By 2:30, everyone went home to wives, partners, or grandchildren. I returned to my semi-detached house and told myself I enjoyed the peace. Margaret's coat still hung in the downstairs cupboard, a sensible navy one with deep pockets. I had tried twice to take it to a charity shop. Both times, I removed it from the hanger, folded it across my arms, and put it back. Helen phoned most Sundays from Leeds. "How are you?" "Dad." "Fine. Eating properly?" "Of course." "Seen anyone this week?" "A few people." That usually meant Jean over the fence, a cashier at Tesco, and perhaps someone I recognized at the bus stop. Helen had a husband, 2 teenagers, and a job that seemed to produce emails at all hours. I loved hearing her voice, but I could hear the life happening behind it. Someone asking where their trainers were, a timer going off, a door closing. I never wanted to add myself to the list of things she had to manage, so I kept the calls brief. Jean invited me round for tea more often than I accepted. She had known Margaret for nearly 30 years and meant well. But I worried about becoming the lonely widower next door who needed checking on. I've plenty to be getting on with, I would say. Usually, I had nothing at all. Then, one wet afternoon in October, I attended the funeral of an old railway colleague named Frank. The crematorium was full of people I had not seen for years. Most arrived in pairs. Men I remembered as young signalmen now walked carefully beside wives with silver hair. Afterwards, people gathered beneath umbrellas and asked one another how retirement was treating them. I gave the usual answer: "Can't complain." When I reached home, the house was already dark. I turned the key, stepped inside, and almost called out, "I'm back." The words stopped in my throat. There was no one waiting to ask how the funeral had gone. No one to say Frank had always been a decent man. No one to place a hand over mine while I spoke about another piece of my old life disappearing. That evening, Hélène sent me un message. "Dad, I found a Facebook group for retired railway workers. You might enjoy it." I nearly ignored it. Facebook had always seemed full of arguments, photographs of lunches, and people pretending their lives were more interesting than they were. Still, the house was quiet, so I joined. For several days, I only read. Then someone posted an old photograph of York Station and claimed it had been taken in 1982. I knew that was wrong. The signal box in the background had been removed the year before. I wrote a short correction. 10 minutes later, someone replied, "You have an excellent memory. My late husband would have enjoyed speaking with you." The name beside the comment was Sarah Bennett. I clicked on her profile. Her photograph was kind rather than glamorous. There were posts about gardening, old films, grief, and places around Yorkshire that I recognized. 20 minutes later, a private message appeared. "I hope you don't mind me writing. You sounded like someone who understands what it means to remember a life other people have forgotten." I read it once, then again, then a third time. Was Sarah simply being friendly? Or had she somehow recognized the part of me I had hidden from everyone else? I did not reply straight away. I told myself I was being sensible. A stranger had sent me a private message, and I had spent most of my working life believing that caution prevented trouble. Railway signaling had no room for guesswork. You checked what was in front of you. Then you checked it again. Still, Sarah's words remained on the screen. Someone who understands what it means to remember a life other people have forgotten. It was an unusual thing to say. Not flirtatious, Not intrusive. Just accurate. Eventually, I typed a short reply. I don't mind. Railwaymen tend to remember details nobody else cares about. Her answer came within a minute. Perhaps details matter because they are where whole lives are kept. That was how it began. At first, we spoke about harmless things. Yorkshire winters. The shops that had vanished from local high streets. Childhood railway journeys, when compartments had proper doors and tea came in thick cups. She told me she preferred Scarborough to Brighton because Scarborough did not try so hard to impress anyone. I said Whitby had always been my favorite. Even when the wind nearly takes your head off, she asked. Especially then. She added a laughing face. I had never been fond of those little symbols. But I smiled. Sarah said she had spent most of her life near Harrogate. Her husband, David, had died 5 years earlier. Since then, she had lived quietly and tried not to become, as she put it, the widow, everyone invited out of duty. I understood exactly what she meant. She was temporarily staying in Cyprus, helping her younger sister settle an estate and arrange the sale of a family property. It sounds rather grand, she wrote one evening. But mostly, it is paperwork. Waiting rooms and arguments over missing signatures. That sounded believable to me. Real problems were usually dull. Her messages arrived with comforting regularity. A cheerful greeting while I was making tea. A longer conversation after dinner. A gentle goodnight just before I went upstairs. She never hurried me. She did not call me handsome or claim we had some extraordinary connection after 3 days. She asked questions and remembered the answers. When I mentioned Margaret had loved sweet peas, Sarah asked a week later whether I had planted any that year. When I told her, Moon River had played at our wedding. She sent me a voice note saying she had listened to it that morning. Her voice was soft and unmistakably British. Although the recording crackled in places. Sorry about the sound, she said. The internet in this flat is hopeless. We spoke about cooking for one. She admitted she sometimes ate toast over the sink rather than wash a plate. I told her I had once made enough stew for 6 people out of habit and eaten it for 4 days because I could not bear to throw it away. You see, she replied. Widowhood is mostly leftovers and pretending you chose the quiet. I read that sentence several times. One evening, I told her about Margaret's coat. I had never mentioned it to Helen. I know it ought to go to charity, I wrote, but every time I touch it, I can still imagine her coming downstairs and asking why I'm interfering with her things. Sarah did not tell me to let go. She did not say Margaret would want me to move on. Instead, she wrote, love doesn't disappear because someone has died. It simply has nowhere to go. I sat at the kitchen table with my hand resting beside the blue Whitby mug. For a while, I could not type anything. No one had ever described grief to me in a way that felt so simple and so true. After that, I began checking my phone before I got out of bed. I told myself it was friendship, nothing more. When I suggested a video call, Sarah agreed immediately. That reassured me. We arranged it for Sunday evening. At 7. My phone rang. I answered. The screen stayed black. Can you see me? I asked. Only for a second, she replied. Her voice cut in and out. Peter, I'm so sorry. This connection is dreadful. We tried twice more. The image never appeared. She sounded genuinely embarrassed. Please don't think I'm avoiding you. Of course not, I said. Technology never works when it matters. A few days later, she sent a photograph of herself, holding a cup of tea beside a balcony. There were pale stone buildings behind her and a strip of blue sky. It felt personal, specific, enough to settle the small unease I had not admitted to feeling. As the weeks passed, I told Sarah things I had kept hidden from everyone else. That I sometimes left the television on through the night because waking to voices felt better than waking to silence. That I worried Helen would eventually see me as another responsibility. That I felt guilty for wanting companionship after 42 years with Margaret. And one particularly difficult evening, that I feared dying alone and not being found for days. Her reply arrived almost at once. You are not invisible to me. Peter. I stared at those words in the dark sitting room. For the first time in years, I felt that someone expected me to be there tomorrow. But one question had begun to sit quietly behind all the comfort. Why did a woman who seemed to understand me so completely always find a reason not to show me her face live? Over the next 6 weeks, Sarah became woven into my days so neatly that I stopped noticing how much space she occupied. She began by calling me my dear Peter. It sounded old-fashioned, which made it easier to accept. Later, it became darling, the first time she wrote it. I stared at the word longer than I care to admit. I did not answer in the same way. Not at first. I was 71 years old. Not a schoolboy. And part of me felt faintly ridiculous. Yet when her message arrived the following morning without it, I felt the absence. By the end of the week, I had started calling her my dear Sarah. She said she had not felt close to anyone since David died. I had forgotten what it was like to tell someone the small things. She wrote, "What small things? That I slept badly. That I saw a dog carrying a loaf of bread. That the woman downstairs has started singing at 6:30 every morning." I laughed aloud in the kitchen. Those were exactly the sorts of details I had missed sharing with Margaret. Sarah never spoke about grand houses, expensive holidays, or a new life filled with excitement. Instead, we imagined ordinary things. Walking slowly along the shambles when the pavements were not too crowded. Sunday, lunch in a country pub, with too much gravy. Whitby, in autumn, when the air smelled of salt, and the gulls became a nuisance. Planting lavender along the garden fence. Sitting together in the conservatory, without feeling obliged to speak. I think comfortable silence is one of the best things about loving someone. She said, "So do I." That was what made it convincing. She did not promise me a different life. She promised to fit gently into the one I already had. I began preparing for her without admitting that was what I was doing. I cleared the boxes from the spare bedroom. I washed the curtains. I replaced the garden bench after noticing one of the wooden slats had split. At a shop in town, I found a second mug in almost the same blue pattern as my Whitby one. I bought it before I could think better of it. A few days later, Jean came round to return a screwdriver. She noticed the 2 mugs on the draining board. Expecting company. No. She raised an eyebrow. One of them must be for somebody. It was on offer. Jean smiled, but said nothing. I changed the subject. Sarah had also begun asking more practical questions. At first, they did not seem personal. Had I finished paying the mortgage? Did the railway pension cover the rising bills? Was I worried about managing the house as I got older? I answered because the questions sounded like concern. The place is fully paid for. I told her. Margaret and I made the final payment years ago. You must be proud. We were careful. You still are. She seemed to admire that about me. One evening, I mentioned Margaret's life insurance. Not the exact amount, only that most of it remained in savings. Sarah replied almost immediately, "I'm glad she made sure you were secure." There was nothing greedy in the response. In fact, she quickly added that money had never been important to her. Once the property in Cyprus was sold, she expected to receive more than enough for a comfortable retirement. A week later, she sent me a solicitor's letter. The estate was valued at over £400,000. The document looked official. There was a company heading, a reference number, formal language, and a signature at the bottom. I searched the firm's name online. A professional website appeared. Photographs of smart offices, a list of partners, a telephone number. That was enough to settle the last of my practical doubts. People planning to steal money, I thought, did not send evidence that they had plenty of their own. Then Helen arrived unexpectedly one Saturday afternoon. She found me in the kitchen, smiling at something Sarah had written. That looks suspiciously cheerful. She said, "It's nothing." Who is she? I looked up too quickly. Helen Friend. So there is someone. Her name is Sarah. We're friends. Where did you meet? Online. Her smile remained. but something in her expression changed. That's nice. Dad, have you spoken properly? Every day. On video, I felt myself stiffen. We've tried. And the connection in Cyprus is unreliable. Helen hesitated. I'm not judging. Just be careful about what you share. I spent 40 years keeping trains from colliding. I said, I can manage a conversation on Facebook. That isn't what I meant. It sounded like it. She apologized. But I still felt patronized. Laughter. I told Sarah. She did not insult Helen. That would have been too obvious. Instead, she wrote, children sometimes struggle to accept that their parents can still have a life of their own. I read the sentence twice. It made my irritation feel justified. It also made Sarah seem like the only person who truly understood why Helen's questions had bothered me. That evening, just before bed, another message appeared. I know it may be too soon. Peter, but I love you. I sat on the edge of the mattress with the phone in my hand. The house was silent. Margaret's photograph stood on the bedside table. For several minutes, I could not move. Then I typed the words I had not expected to say to anyone again. I love you too. Had I found a second chance at love? Or was Sarah quietly becoming the only person whose advice I still trusted? The first inconsistency was so small that I almost admired myself for noticing it. Sarah had messaged shortly after midday to say she was having lunch near Limassol with her sister. It's warm enough to sit outside. She wrote. That evening, during one of our voice calls, I heard rain tapping somewhere behind her. It sounds dreadful there. I said, it is. Absolutely pouring. I glanced at the weather on my tablet. Bright skies across Limassol. No rain forecast anywhere nearby. For a moment, I said nothing. Then Sarah laughed softly. The weather changes quickly across the island. You know what coastal places are like. That was true enough. Whitby could feel like 3 seasons in a single afternoon. I told myself I was being foolish. A few days later, she sent another photograph. She was standing beside a pale stone wall, wearing a wool coat and a patterned scarf. The clothes looked more suitable for April in Yorkshire than winter in Cyprus. I zoomed in. Then I felt ashamed for doing it. People sent older photographs all the time. I had photographs on my own profile that were several years old. Why should Sarah be any different? The next unease arrived during a phone call. I could hear several voices behind her. Not distant traffic. People speaking close by. One of them sounded like a man. Are you at home? I asked. No. Darling, I'm at the solicitor's office. At this hour, they're dealing with an urgent problem involving the estate. There was a pause. Then a door closed in the background and the voices disappeared. I accepted the explanation. I wanted to accept it. Perhaps that was the real difference. Then, one evening, she called me, David. It happened so naturally that for a second, I thought I had imagined it. I'm sorry. David. She stopped. The silence that followed felt longer than it probably was. David, I asked. Her voice changed immediately. Oh, Peter. I'm so sorry. I said nothing. That was my husband's name. I was looking through some old paperwork before you called. It must have brought everything back. I felt the doubt turn into guilt. Of course. I hate that I've hurt you. You haven't. I can hear it in your voice. No. Really. I understand. And I did understand. I had called Helen by Margaret's name once after the funeral. Grief rearranged things inside the mind. By the end of the call, I was apologizing to Sarah for making her feel bad. The video calls remained no better. Sometimes, the connection froze before any picture appeared. Sometimes I heard her voice but saw only darkness. Once, for less than a second, the screen flashed. A blurred forehead. Silver hair. Then nothing. There I said. I saw you. The call ended immediately. A minute later, Sarah rang back without video. She sounded upset. This is humiliating. It isn't. You think I'm hiding something. I never said that. You don't have to. I spent the next 20 minutes reassuring her. By the end, I felt cruel for having wanted something as ordinary as seeing the face of the woman who said she loved me. Around that time, I printed several of the documents she had sent. The probate letters, the estate valuation, the solicitor's correspondence. I told myself I wanted proper copies in case she needed help once she came home. Jean noticed the envelopes when she brought back a casserole dish. That looks official, she said. It's Sarah's family business. In Cyprus. Yes. Jean picked up one sheet, but I took it from her before she could read it. She's having a difficult time. Jean's expression remained gentle. Just remember, Peter, official-looking papers can still be forged. The remark felt like an accusation. You don't know her. No. That's rather my point. Something in me hardened. You've decided she isn't real because we met online. I haven't decided anything. She's educated. She's sensible. She isn't some silly girl inventing stories for attention. Jean stepped back. I only meant to say be careful. Well, I am careful. My voice was sharper than hers had ever been. She placed the casserole dish on the counter. All right. When she left, she did not ask whether I needed anything from the shops, as she usually did. I watched her cross the short path between our houses and felt a brief urge to call her back. Instead, I messaged Sarah. That night, she told me someone had attempted to access her online banking. Her accounts had been frozen. She did not ask me for money. She only said she was frightened. I feel completely alone here, she wrote. So I stayed awake with her until nearly 3 in the morning. I sent reassuring messages. I told her we would deal with whatever happened together. The fact that she asked for nothing made me trust her more. 2 days later, she sent a screenshot. The estate funds had been approved. A large payment was shown as pending. Relief swept through me. For a few hours, every doubt seemed embarrassing. Then another message appeared. There is one final complication. I stared at those words, feeling the same small knot return. Why had the final complication arrived only after I had learned to feel guilty whenever I questioned her? Sarah waited until the following evening before explaining what the final complication was. I had spent most of the day expecting her message. Each time my phone vibrated, my stomach tightened. At 7:30, she finally called. Her voice sounded quieter than usual. The estate has been approved, she said, but the funds cannot be released until the tax and legal clearance has been paid. How much? There was a pause. £3,850. I sat back in my chair. The amount was not impossible. That almost made it worse. Had she asked for 50,000? I might have laughed and ended the call. But £850 sounded like the sort of awkward, specific figure that appeared on official paperwork. What about the money in your account? I asked. It is still frozen because of the attempted access. And your sister? She has contributed everything she can. Sarah took a breath. I feel dreadful even telling you this. I said nothing. Please don't do anything that makes you uncomfortable. Peter. The words should have reassured me. Instead, they placed the decision entirely in my hands. I'll repay you within 5 working days. She continued. The moment the estate money clears. I've never sent money to someone I haven't met. I know. Her voice was gentle. That is why I don't want to pressure you. After the call, her messages became shorter. No darling. No plans for Whitby. Only polite replies that made me imagine her alone in a rented flat, frightened that the one person she trusted had decided she was a liar. By 10 o'clock, I could no longer bear it. I opened my banking app. The transfer took less than 5 minutes. When I sent her the confirmation, she called immediately. You have no idea what this means. It is only a loan. I know. And you'll have it back before the end of the week. For the next 2 days. She sent constant updates. The solicitor had received the payment. The clearance had been logged. The funds were being processed. Then, on the 5th day, there was another delay. A document required additional certification. I cannot believe this. Sarah said. Neither could I. The certification fee was £6. Lambe. This time. I hesitated longer. Sarah sent me a photograph of her passport. The name matched her profile. Sara Ane Bennett. The date of birth was right. The photograph showed the same silver-haired woman I had come to know. Then she sent another image. A sheet of paper held in front of the camera with a handwritten message. Peter. Thank you for believing in us. The writing looked fresh. Personal. Made only for me. I sent the second payment the following morning. After that, the requests did not arrive all at once. They came carefully spaced. Each attached to a new problem. A cross-border transfer charge. Medical treatment for Sarah's sister after a sudden collapse. A hotel bill when their flat was supposedly broken into. A legal fee to prevent the property sale from falling through. Every emergency sounded temporary. Every payment was described as the last. By the end of the month, I had sent nearly £27,000. Some of it came from Margaret's life insurance money. The first time I moved money from that account. I sat looking at her name on the old paperwork for several minutes. I told myself she would have understood. Margaret had never abandoned anyone in trouble. Still, I began hiding the bank letters when Helen visited. I placed them beneath old railway magazines in the sideboard. I stopped mentioning Sarah to Jean. When Jean invited me for tea, I said I was busy. I had also begun losing weight. Food seemed less important than keeping my phone close. I carried it from room to room. If Sarah did not answer for an hour, I imagined hospitals, police stations, or some new disaster. Then came the largest request. £18,000. She needed it by the following morning. Without it, she said, the Cypriot authorities would seize the entire estate, and the property sale would collapse. I know how this sounds, she whispered. My chest felt tight. It's a great deal of money. I'll understand if you say no. What happens if I do? There was silence. Then she began to cry. Not loudly, just enough for me to hear her trying to control it. I lose everything. She promised that, once the payment cleared, she would book the first available flight to Manchester. Within 48 hours, she said. She would be standing in front of me. No more failed calls. No more distance. No more waiting. The following afternoon, I completed the transfer form. Recipient details. Reference number. Amount. £18. Ling ling ling. The confirmation button appeared on my screen. My thumb hovered above it. For the first time since Sarah entered my life, I could feel two different voices inside me. One said I was about to save the woman I loved. The other asked whether I was about to lose the last financial security Margaret had left me. I still had not confirmed the transfer when I made the mistake of mentioning it to Helen's husband. It was meant to sound casual. He worked in finance. So I rang and asked whether banks usually allowed people to increase their daily transfer limits online. There was a short silence. How much are we talking about? Peter. Nothing dramatic. That wasn't my question. I regretted calling at once. I'm only asking generally. Within 20 minutes. Helen rang. Dad. What's going on? Nothing. Mark says you asked about transferring a large amount of money. He had no business telling you. He's my husband. And it's my account. She said she was coming over. I told her not to. She arrived from Leeds just after 7. Still wearing her work clothes beneath a damp coat. Her hair was wet from the rain. And she looked more frightened than angry. Illitarian. But I did not offer tea. What is this transfer for? She asked. It's private. £18,000 isn't private when someone may be stealing it from you. No one is stealing anything. Who are you sending it to? I folded my arms. That is none of your business. Helen looked towards the coffee table. My phone was still open on the transfer page. She saw the amount before I could pick it up. Oh. Dad. The pity in her voice humiliated me more than shouting would have done. Don't speak to me as though I'm confused. I'm not. You think I'm incapable? I think someone is manipulating you. You've never even spoken to her. Neither have you properly. That struck harder than she intended. We speak every day. But you haven't met her. You haven't seen her live on camera. She's dealing with a legal matter abroad. And she needs £18,000 from a man she's never met. I turned away. Helen's voice softened. Please tell me this is the first time. I could not look at her. She understood immediately. How much have you sent? That isn't relevant. Her eyes filled with tears. It is relevant to me. You only seem interested now because money is involved. Her expression changed. That is cruel. You're here telling me I can't manage my own life. I'm here because I'm frightened. I wanted to hear the fear. Instead, I heard judgment. You ring once a week. Helen. You ask whether I've eaten and then rush off because someone needs picking up or there's another email. Sarah listens to me. Dad. She understands what it's like to be alone. I know you're lonely. No. You don't. The words hung between us. Helen wiped her cheek quickly. Let me speak to her. She doesn't need to prove herself to you. One video call. That's all. I messaged Sarah. Her answer came almost immediately. I will not be interrogated by someone who has already decided I am a criminal. I showed Helen. She's upset. She's avoiding me. You've attacked her. Helen asked to see my bank statements. That was when I lost my temper. Get out. She stared at me. Dad. Please. I said get out. At the front door. She turned back. I would rather have you angry with me than watch someone destroy you because you were lonely. Then she left. I stood in the hallway listening to her car pull away. The house felt colder than before she arrived. When I told Sarah what had happened, she was sympathetic at first. Then her tone shifted. Your daughter may try to take control of your finances. She wouldn't. People behave differently when inheritance is involved. The word made me uncomfortable. Sarah suggested changing my banking passwords and telling Helen nothing else about our plans. For the first time, her advice did not sound loving. It sounded like an instruction. The following morning, Jean saw Helen sitting in her car outside my house. I did not know until later that Helen had been crying. She told Jean enough for Jean to understand. That afternoon, Jean knocked on my door. I'd like to see Sarah's photograph. No. Peter. Please. This has nothing to do with you. Margaret asked me to keep an eye on you. My anger rose again. Margaret is dead. She doesn't get to decide how I live. Jean's face tightened. But she did not leave. No. She said quietly. But she knew how much you would miss being loved. Something inside me gave way. Without speaking, I opened Sarah's profile and handed Jean the phone. She looked at the photograph. Then her entire expression changed. Not confusion. Recognition. Where did you get this? She asked. I felt the blood drain from my face. Why did Jean look less surprised by Sarah's photograph than I did? Jean did not speak for several seconds. She placed my phone carefully on the kitchen table, as though it had become something dangerous. I've seen this woman before, she said. My mouth went dry. Where? Last autumn. Our church helped raise money for the hospice. She crossed the room and opened a drawer beneath the kettle. Inside were old newsletters, receipts and leaflets held together with an elastic band. Her hands moved quickly now. There was a campaign about families who'd received end-of-life care. She pulled out a folded leaflet and smoothed it flat. Then she placed it beside my phone. The two photographs were identical. The same dark coat, the same silver brooch, the same background, the same warm, patient smile. I had looked at every morning and every night. Only the name beneath it was different. Dr. Eleanor Price. Retired consultant. North Yorkshire. I stared at the words. That proves nothing. Jean looked at me. Peter. Sarah could know her. She might have permission to use the photograph. Why would anyone use another woman's face? There could be an explanation. I could hear myself reaching for one. But I could not stop. Jean opened her laptop and searched the hospice website. Within minutes, more photographs appeared. Eleanor Price standing beside a fundraising banner. Eleanor at a garden event. Eleanor speaking to volunteers. Every image had been used somewhere on Sarah's profile. One had been cropped. Another had been reversed. The photograph beside the balcony had Eleanor's face placed over a different background. I felt suddenly sick. Jean pushed a chair towards me. "Sit down." "I'm all right." I wasn't. My legs had begun to shake. Helen returned less than an hour later. Jean had called her without asking me. Normally, that would have angered me. This time, I felt relieved when my daughter walked through the door. She did not say, "I told you so." She took off her coat, sat beside me, and asked quietly, "Can we check everything?" I nodded. We began with the solicitor's letters. Helen found the firm's official telephone number through a trusted directory rather than the website Sarah had sent. A real solicitor called us back. The reference number did not exist. The signature belonged to no one at the company. The letters were forged. The website I had found used an address almost identical to the real firm's, with one letter changed. I had searched for proof and found exactly what they had prepared for me to find. Helen then showed me how to search the remaining photographs. The same face appeared beneath different names. Claire, Patricia, Susan. One profile claimed she lived in Bristol. Another said she was a nurse working in Dubai. I stared at the screen until the names no longer looked like words. Then my phone rang. Sarah. For once. She answered immediately when I called back. "Peter." "Darling. Have you made the payment?" I looked at Jean and Helen. "Turn on your camera." There was a pause. "You know the connection is poor." "Turn it on." "Why are you speaking to me like this? Your name isn't Sarah Bennett." The silence that followed was different from every silence we had shared before. There was no tenderness in it. No grief. No patience. When the voice returned, even its warmth seemed to have vanished. "Is Helen there?" A chill went through me. The person knew my daughter's name. Knew how often she visited. Knew when I was alone. "Who are you?" "You sent the money willingly." "Who are you?" "You made your own decisions." "Peter." The accent sounded flatter now. Less careful. I realized I had never known the person behind it at all. Then came the threat. They said they had my private messages. The things I had confessed late at night. The photographs I had shared. Nothing indecent, but personal enough to shame me. They threatened to send everything to Helen, my former colleagues, and people in the railway group. My hand began trembling so badly that Helen reached for the phone. I ended the call. Within seconds, Sarah's Facebook profile disappeared. The WhatsApp photograph vanished. Messages stopped delivering. 4 months of love was erased in less than a minute. I believed everything had gone with it. Then Helen looked at my banking screen. The $18,000 hasn't been confirmed. I had completed the form but never pressed the final button. We canceled it immediately. Then we contacted the bank and Action Fraud. The bank's fraud team began freezing accounts connected to the earlier transfers. An investigator asked me to read several messages aloud. My voice broke as I repeated words that had once made me feel loved. The investigator waited, then said quietly, "This worked because it was designed to imitate a genuine relationship. Not because you were foolish." That was the first moment I began to understand. I had not been chosen. I had been studied. But as the bank traced the payments, one question remained. Could any of Margaret's money be recovered? And if it could not, would I ever forgive myself? The investigation continued for months. At first, I expected something decisive to happen. An arrest, a name, perhaps even a telephone call telling me the money had been found. Instead, justice arrived in fragments. A letter from the bank, a request for another statement, a detective asking whether I recognized an account number. Most of the transfers had passed through several British accounts before being moved abroad. Some belonged to people whose identities had been stolen. Others were controlled by what the police called money mules, people paid to receive money and send it elsewhere without asking questions. By the time the accounts were traced, much of what I had sent had disappeared. The final £18,000 was safe because I had never confirmed it. That fact should have comforted me. Instead, I kept thinking about the $27,000 I had already lost. Margaret's money, our security, Years of being careful, undone in a few weeks. Then the bank told me one connected UK account had been frozen quickly enough for investigators to recover part of the funds. They also reviewed the earlier payments and how the unusual pattern had been handled. Eventually, they agreed to reimburse some of my losses. When everything was settled, approximately £11,000 remained gone. It was not nothing, but it was not everything either. Helen tried to sound positive. You still have the house. Dad. I know. You're not in debt. I know. Yet numbers were not the only things I counted. I counted every warning I had ignored, every lie I had told Helen, every time I had defended Sarah against Jean. Several weeks later, the police informed me that a suspected money mule had been arrested for handling funds linked to several romance fraud victims. Was it the person who spoke to me? I asked. We don't know. Will you find them? We'll continue investigating. It was not the answer I wanted. There was no dramatic confrontation. No one stood in court and explained why they had chosen me. No apology arrived. The person who had called me darling remained somewhere beyond reach. At first, that felt like no justice at all. Then an investigator showed me how my messages had helped connect several cases. A 76-year-old widow from Durham had been preparing to sell her bungalow for a man she believed was trapped overseas. A retired teacher from Kent thought she was paying travel fees for an engineer who wanted to return to Britain and marry her. The same phrases appeared again and again. You are the only person I trust. Once this is settled, we can finally be together. Please don't tell your family. They won't understand. Words I had believed were written only for me had been copied into other lonely lives. For the first time, my shame began changing into anger. I agreed to provide a full statement. I handed over the voice notes, forged letters, account details, and message history. Reading through everything again was painful. But it no longer felt like reliving a love affair. It felt like documenting a crime. A few months later, I was asked to speak anonymously at a fraud awareness event at a community center in York. I nearly refused. On the evening itself, I sat at the back, hoping nobody would notice me. Then the organizer introduced my story without using my name. When she invited me forward, my legs felt unsteady. I stood behind a small table and looked at the rows of faces. People my age, some older, several sitting alone. For a moment, I could not speak. Then I said the one thing I needed them to understand. I didn't send money because I was greedy. I sent it because someone made me believe I mattered again. A woman in the second row lowered her head and began crying. Someone else reached across and held her hand. Afterwards, an elderly man waited until the room had nearly emptied. He told me he had been speaking online to a woman who said she needed help paying a customs fee. How much? I asked. 4,000. Have you sent it? Not yet. Together, we called his bank. The advisor placed a warning on his account and helped him block the contact. When the call ended, the man looked at me and said, "You may have saved me from losing everything." For the first time since Jean recognized that photograph, I felt I had taken something back. Not the money, not the months, but perhaps the right to believe my experience still had value. Stopping another victim mattered. Yet as I returned to my quiet house that night, another question remained. Could I still believe genuine companionship was possible for me, or had Sarah taken that as well? 6 months after Jean recognized Sarah's photograph, my life was quiet again, but it was no longer the same sort of quiet. Before, the silence in the house had felt like proof that life was passing somewhere else. Now it felt more honest. Some days were still difficult. I would reach for my phone at night and remember the messages that used to arrive before bed. Sleep well. Darling, I wish I were there. Soon. For a moment, I would miss them. Not the person who sent them. The feeling they created. That was harder to admit. I apologized to Jean one afternoon over tea. We were sitting in her kitchen, in the same place where everything had fallen apart. I said some awful things. You were frightened. I told you Margaret was dead, as though that meant your concern did not matter. Jean looked down at her cup. You were defending what you thought was love. I was defending a lie. Loneliness can make proud people defend the very thing hurting them. There was no judgment in her voice. That made the words easier to accept. I apologized to Helen too. Not quickly. Not with a vague sentence over the phone. I drove to Leeds and sat at her kitchen table while the children were upstairs. I knew something was wrong. I admitted. Helen looked at me. When? Before the final transfer. Perhaps even before the first. Then, why did you keep going? I rubbed my hands together. Because admitting it meant losing her. Helen's eyes filled. But she did not look away. I'm sorry I wasn't there more. You called every week. I thought that was enough. So did I. That was the truth of it. We had both mistaken contact for closeness. We agreed on something simple. She would not monitor me. I would not hide things from her. No passwords. No control. Just honesty. A few weeks later, Jean persuaded me to join a walking group that met beside the river house. I nearly refused. Then I remembered how many times I had claimed to enjoy my own company. So I went. The first morning was cold and gray. There were 12 of us, all wearing sensible coats and pretending not to be out of breath. We walked slowly along the river, talking about parking, knees, grandchildren, and the price of coffee. No one asked for my savings. No one promised me a new life. They simply expected me to turn up again the following week. That felt like a beginning. One Sunday afternoon, Helen came over with her family. Jean joined us for tea. Without thinking, I reached for the second blue mug I had once bought for Sarah. For months, I had kept it at the back of the cupboard because looking at it made me feel foolish. Now I filled it and handed it to Jean. She smiled. New mug. Not really? I sat down opposite her. It was only a mug. Not proof of love. Not proof of humiliation. Just something useful again. That evening, after everyone left, the house felt quiet. I stood in the kitchen listening to the clock. For a moment, the old emptiness returned. Then my phone vibrated. A message from Helen. Home safely. Love you, Dad. See you next Sunday. I replied before pride could interfere. I'm glad you came. The house feels quiet now. Her answer arrived almost immediately. Then we'll come earlier next week. I placed the phone beside Margaret's photograph. I still missed the woman I thought was Sarah. That may sound strange, but I did not miss the scammer. I missed being expected. I missed believing someone was thinking about me. The hope had been false. The feeling had not. That was the lesson I carried forward. Loneliness should be answered with connection, not secrecy. I used to think being deceived meant I had been stupid. Now I know the truth was more uncomfortable than that. I had been lonely, and someone had studied loneliness well enough to imitate love. I lost money. I lost pride. But I did not lose my daughter, my home, or the right to trust people again. The next time love enters my life, it will not ask me to hide it from the people who care about me. And I often wonder how many people are still protecting a secret online relationship because admitting the truth feels more frightening than losing the money.